Welcome back to the OPEX podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by Ryan Banta. Ryan is a high school track and field coach at Parkway Central High School in Missouri in the United States and is the author of the book, The Sprinter's Compendium. On this episode, Ryan and I discuss the importance of mentors, why the answer to most questions begins with "it depends," and Ryan outlines the 5 training systems he describes in his book. Guys, this was a great conversation with Ryan. Hope you really enjoy it. Stay with us. All right, Banta, you lunatic. We have finally reunited. Come here, just for the listeners of the OPEX podcast, just fill us in on your background.
Yeah, so I'm a high school coach out in the United States, in Missouri, St. Louis suburb known as Chesterfield. And I coach track and field and cross country over there. I used to coach football. I'm at the high school level, so I deal with kids anywhere from the ages of 13 to 19 years old. And I was a frustrated sprinter myself, often injured at the Division III level in college in track and field here in the United States. Played football, played rugby, American football, and played rugby. So I have various different athletic experiences and things like that. So I had the opportunity to coach back at my old high school and basically cornered them in so that I could get the job. And luckily enough, they gave it to me, and we've been growing the program ever since and have had quite a bit of success at our level in the St. Louis area.
Sweet. Who's your football team?
So the American foot, you mean the team I play?
Yeah, no. Who do you follow? Do you follow a team?
Oh, well, the hell with the St. Louis Rams. They're now the Los Angeles Rams, and Stan Kroenke, he can burn. There was nothing more exciting than for the St. Louis Blues hockey team to win this weekend and to put it in his face where he said, St. Louis isn't much of a sports town, yet we broke the NHL record for viewership in Game 7, and we also broke the the World Cup viewership for female soccer and all that kind of stuff. So forget him. So my team is the Kansas City Chiefs, which is also in the state of Missouri, and Derek Hansen's team, even though he's all the way up in Canada, he claims the Chiefs. And we had actually a really cool situation. One of our former athletes from our high school, Colin Saunders, who's known as the backflip guy, for those of us that kind of follow a lot of football, he got drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs and signed his contract last week. So I'll be spending a lot of time in Kansas City for about 8 weekends out of the year.
Do you know how much you got?
What's that?
How much?
His contract? It basically is around $1 million a year.
Oh, just $1 million,
Yeah. Well, I know. I mean, it's a big deal, but he's such a great kid and, an amazing guy. Very, very, very smart and very athletic. I mean, he's 320 pounds at 6'2" and can do, no-handed assisted backflips and stuff like that. And very powerful. And he actually is a cool story because he didn't play in the Division I. He played in Division I AA. So a lot of guys, in the NFL don't necessarily get drafted out of that division. But he was so dominant as a defensive lineman in that division that he was able to garner the attention of the NFL. And he's a super high character guy as well, too. So a guy you can root for, a guy who's a good story about work ethic and, taking everyone's challenges and saying, that's right, I'm going to prove you guys wrong. I'm going to make this happen. It's amazing. So we're really excited for him.
Yeah, they'll be one of the favorites too for the Super Bowl. They weren't far off just the season gone. Patriots beat them in the semi-final.
Yeah, and they kind of got screwed out of that game as well too. And being the Chiefs fan, and I, when Christian Okoye was there, the Nigerian nightmare.
Yeah, what a bloke.
So it's a great team.
Yeah, absolutely. So you wrote this Bible of a book, The Sprinter's Compendium.
Yeah.
So tell us about this book. How did it happen? Why did you want to write it? Bring us through that process.
So when I started out as a coach, I didn't have a lot of places I could go to get information on training. And basically when I first started coaching, my kids were coached the way that I was coached by my high school coach. And he does a pretty good job. He's still around. He's a Hall of Famer for the Missouri Coaches Association. But, I knew that there was probably some different avenues and things. And because I spent so much time hurt, I always felt like, God, if there was some kind of book out there. And that was kind of always on the back of my mind. And eventually I met a real controversial figure known as, or I should say controversial, but a very outspoken figure known as Carl Valley. And he, wrote for EliteTrack.com, which is Mike Young's website. And he and I kind of developed a friendship online through just kind of our opinions and talks about training. And I really respected his basically what seemed like endless knowledge on technology and research and things like that. And so one of the conversations we came across is where's the book on sprinting? There's never really been a fully fleshed out, developed book on sprint training in distance and in weightlifting and in stretching and in swimming and pretty much everything else. There is a Bible. In fact, I think the swimmers one is called the Swimmer's Bible, but there's a book for all the other basically athletic pursuits, but there isn't one for sprinting. And so we kind of looked at, the best example for distance running of this all-encompassing book is the Dr. Daniels running formula. And so what we wanted to do, or what I wanted to do, is basically create a book like that. And so we had this general idea, but I didn't know what it was going to entirely look like when it came to fruition. So when I was at the Olympic Training Center in 2012 as an emerging elite coach, when we got introduced to everybody and we're sitting around the cafeteria just chatting it up, we're talking about different things about track and training. And one of the coaches brought up an article that I had wrote on elite track and didn't know that he was talking to the guy who wrote it. And so it was like one of those moments like, yeah, well, I wrote that. And it was pretty funny. But what was really neat about that and scary at the same time is I didn't realize anybody was reading any of my stuff. And so when I came back home from that experience, I talked to my wife and I said, hey, sweetheart, I can't believe these people are actually reading this stuff. You won't believe what happened. And all this time, I kind of had this itch that I wanted to scratch, this desire to get all of my thoughts in one place and provide something that I never had as a coach, which was a catch-all book that had all the different aspects of training for that particular aspect of sport. And then through my experience with the Olympic Training Center and my writing on elite track, I realized there were a lot of coaches that probably wanted to participate in this as well. And so the first kind of test of this through elite track is I did a thing called the Wooden Project. And what John Wooden, a basketball coach at UCLA, very famous coach, he would every year pick out an aspect of his game that his teams were not very good at. So like, for example, free throw shooting. And he would go out and find who he thought were the 10 best free throw coaches in the world. And he would send them a list of 10 questions about how do they train it, what drills do they use, when do they use it, why do they use it. And the deal is that if you respond to 5 of the 10 questions, then you get all the other 10 participants and Coach Wooden's ideas and thoughts about how to improve free throw shooting. So I thought, wouldn't that be a cool thing to kind of do on elite track and do it for track and field? Well, the very first week that we did it, we got over 100 pages of responses from different coaches and everything. And I said, man, there's something really special here. And so to extrapolate that out, I go, well, we probably could do this in a book format. And instead of just, getting the community, maybe I could be more specific in targeting kind of expert coaches at the youth, high school, college, and pro level to get to be a part of the program. And thankfully, a bunch of coaches decided to, join in on that. And it was a really, really exciting project. But then what I knew that I had on my hands is this monster of a book. And I knew it was going to take a really, really long time to finish. But what I thought would be a long time would be 2 years, and it turned out to be 5 years. And but thankfully, it's been well received, and it's been sold in over 45 different countries. And we have 50 plus contributors in the book that don't all agree, which is kind of the point of the book itself, is to give you many roads to Rome or many different ways to skin a cat. And I think that there's value in that for all coaches. So at all levels, you have your elites that would like to listen to, what Dan Path has to say. And then, coaches who are more high school coaches that may want to hear what I have to say or Tony Holler has to say. that are more at that level. So I think it's accessible by all people.
So Ryan, you did a presentation at Altus back in 2017 where you spoke about your book, and one part that you spoke about from your book was this common theme of mentors. So do you just touch into that?
Yeah. So, all coaches, in order to be successful, you've got to have a really good group of advisors or sage people that you can lean on that can direct you in the right way. Unfortunately, not all of us have great mentors. So one of the things that I kind of developed out of that book is I saw a theme of different people that constantly were being referenced by other people as being influential to their training. Obviously we mentioned Dan Path, Gary Winkler, Brooks Johnson, Tony Wells, a number of different coaches that have influenced the style or methods, Clyde Hart being another one, that have influenced other coaches. Now, some of these mentors are people that you just know because you've read what they've written on different websites or articles that they've done, or you've seen them at a conference. And some of these mentors are people that, you have direct relationships with. It doesn't matter. The point is that no matter who your mentor is, they need to be somebody who has proven over a long period of time that their methods have been successful, they've shown growth, and they've developed. And one of the things that always kind of touched me in terms of, how to move forward as a coach is the quote that if you're the smartest guy in your circle, you need a new circle. And so all of these coaches have spent a lot of time around some of the masters, but also they themselves, when they become the masters, have worked to help others. And so I feel like as coaches, when you look at who these people are most successful and why they're most successful, it's because they found the right people to get advice from, but also what makes those people great that are the mentors, their willingness to share. So like Dan Path goes way out of his way to share all the time at pretty much any time at night, any time of day. And he's very, very willing and freely, able to give out his knowledge and to share that. And he's proven it time and time again with a multitude of different events and a multitude of different athletes in different countries. And I really feel like his model of mentorship is one that I think a lot of other coaches and universities and even countries and their associations should follow. And it kind of, I think where he kind of basically came out of his shell is when Canada had what was called, I think, the Canadian Coaches Center, and they would do like a weekly podcast or a weekly long form interview with a bunch of different coaches. And they shared a ton of documents and information from the IAAF and other people that have done research models and comparative research between, different systems. And I think that, he really liked that. And I think that kind of was in many ways the baseline for Altus to be constructed as well. And so when you look at the really, really, really good coaches, there are a number of ways to get it done. But if you have a mentor and they've been successful over a long period of time with very different populations over that period of time, you found someone who's probably got it right. And those people are critical for you to have your growth. Because when I first started coaching, I thought I knew everything. I thought I knew all the mistakes that my coach made in college or in my high school situation. And the worst thing that happened to me is we were really successful right away. And it took 5 years for me to figure out, holy crap, that was a fluke. And the reality is that I don't really know what I'm doing. And I need to go find people who do. And I need to beg and plead for answers.
A second part of your talk then was this concept of it depends. So do you just want to touch on what you mean by it depends?
So when you go to search out these mentors and these people who you believe have sage advice and wisdom, if they give you a paint by numbers answer where it's like, to get A, you've got to do B, to get to B, eventually you're going to have to, do C. And that doesn't hold up under stress. And what I mean by that is that every athlete, every situation provides different opportunities and different challenges. And so when I met with a lot of these coaches, like Gary Winkler is a one that I brought up before, but Gary was really good at designing what would be called modules, where you have these packages of workouts together that are in many ways you would look at, oh, well, here's paint by numbers. You do 10 times this, 20 times this. You follow it up with a 20, 30 meter acceleration here. And it's this whole package of a workout. And when I saw that at my USATF level 2 school way back over a decade ago, I was like, ooh, I need to get all that. I need to figure out a way for him to give me that. Give me. And what he really touched me when he said, hey, I'm going to give you this. But what you have to understand, Ryan, is that these workouts are going to provide you more questions than they are answers. And me being the young, very aggressive and hungry coach, I was like, whatever, just give me the workouts. It'll be fine. I'll figure it out and I'll plug and play. And the reality is that, yes, you can plug and play in certain situations, but you need to know when to plug those things in, when to pull them back out, when to tweak it, to switch it, to unload it. And there's the mystery of training, which is what makes coaching so much fun. Isn't the easy season where everything's really successful and you win all the time. I mean, that's fun. But what's more fun and more gratifying and rewarding is when you start to kind of figure out that path in the darkness of how best to attack this problem that's been presented in front of you. So when I talk to Dan Path, one of the answers that Dan always gives, and a lot of really good coaches gives, is when I ask him, well, what would you do this in this situation to train a 400-meter runner that's coming down from the 800? And his first answer would be, well, it all depends. And so what does that mean? All depends means, what's your training environment? What's your training age? What event are you training? What's the financial situation of the kid? What's your time allotment for the kid? What time of day are you going to be able to train? What type of athlete are they? Are they a warrior type or a scholar type? Are they a hamstring centric? Are they a quad centric? Are they a true blue short 100-meter sprinter? Are they a 200, 400-meter sprinter? Are they what we call a long sprinter? I don't call it middle distance, because when you call it middle distance, sprinters don't want to do it. So I call it long sprinting, And so there's so many factors that you have just right there that I presented that can be part of that all depends answer. And so it's really kind of a Socratic seminar in, well, why are you doing that? Well, it depends on this situation. What do you think about this? What about this? And eventually you get led to a place where now you have a choice of answers that you can move forward with, that you can feel better with. But it's not going to be paint by numbers. It's not going to be X equals A all the time. And so once you kind of succumb to the mystery of training and you understand that it's not going to be clear blue, it's not going to be something where you're just going to follow a straight path and there's not going to be any divergence. Once you understand that answer isn't as frustrating. In fact, it's more exciting because it gives you a better kind of scaffolding, if you will, of, well, how do I attack this problem? These are the critical factors. And so I think that that's something what really good coaches understand, but really young coaches like I used to be really get frustrated with. And what you find out as you move forward in this process is you don't know anything. And you only have a few small truths in which you can latch onto that you pretty much know most of the time work out. And if those don't work out, then I'm going to go this direction. But by understanding that most of it's a mystery, you become more able to adapt. You become less wedded to things. And therefore, you become actually better for that individual athlete because they are unique. They come to you with a unique set of opportunities and a unique set of challenges.
Yeah, context is king. Do you know, Stu McMillan put out a tweet. I don't know how long ago it was. It isn't that long ago, like it was maybe a few weeks back, but essentially, and I'm just paraphrasing, but essentially Stu was like, it depends is not an answer, it's the beginning of an answer. So again, he's just kind of highlighting that, context is so important. That's probably why most people start their answers with it depends. But he's like, it depends is the start of the conversation. It shouldn't be the answer though, because it is frustrating. People go, well, it depends, and then they leave it at that. It's like, it depends is the beginning of the answer, let's discuss now. But definitely, our context is absolute king.
And to jump off of that, or to piggyback off of that, that is a great philosophy, that it's the start of the conversation. And then what you've got to do there is go, okay, now let's run through the list of things that could be part of the answer, and I think that that's what's kind of cool, is now we need to go to work. It does depend. So then it goes back to that idea of the Socratic seminar, where you're asking a lot of questions. The mentor is asking you a lot of questions and then driving you to maybe part of the solutions along the way. And I think that that's really valuable.
Is Gary Winkler still coaching?
I know that he was advising a multi-event athlete in Canada a couple years ago. Now what Gary's doing is he's living as a cowboy out in the Wild West, and he's making saddles and belt buckles. I mean, you talk about a man he was college educated as a mathematician. Then he ends up becoming a track coach, and then his end of his career is he's doing this artistic work with leather and cowboys and saddles, and the stuff he does is incredible. You talk about a man who is just very talented. So I think he still does some conferences and he talks at some events. And I know he was advising a Canadian multi-eventer, but that was the last time I heard of him actually specifically coaching. Most of his pictures now are him in a cowboy hat, sitting tall on a horse.
Yeah, Vern Gabetta told me that he makes saddles.
Yeah. They're beautiful. I mean, they absolutely, not to plug the guy, but if you ever want it, if you're ever into the cowboy culture, he's really got some beautiful artistic stuff that he's created.
Hey, Gary Winkler, if you're listening to this and you have a website selling your saddles, I'll happily put it into the show notes. Anyone looking for saddles? Before we get into discussing the sort of 5 models that you discussed when you gave your talk at Altus, again, so the 5 models being the Minimus Approach, Adapt or Die, which I love, Concurrent, Long to Short, and the Flow State or the Flow Approach. Before we get into that, I want you to answer this question for me. What was the process like approaching people to contribute to the book? Because you did speak about this too at your Altus talk, like, some people, you were saying, well, actually, it was a podcast, I think. Maybe it wasn't the Altus talk, but I heard you say, like, 1 or 2 people declined not to contribute to the book because they were unsure, like, who you were. They didn't really know you initially, and they're like, what's going to do with this information? But then you were saying that once you told people, well, Dan Pfaff is contributing, and some of these other great coaches are going to contribute too, that more people were starting to, they were willing and more open then to contribute. But you talk us through that process. What was it like to approach people initially, and what was it like with anyone who was like skeptical?
So anybody who's out there that's really successful, that isn't in the book, they were asked and they declined. Again, when you talk about true master flow state coaches, really good coaches, if you want to be a legend, as you like to say, or somebody who has a legacy that lasts forever, you need to share your knowledge, because when you're dead and gone, the only way that your legacy lives on, the only way that your value lives on, is through the mentorship that the people you mentored continue to help others, and then those people continue to help others down the path. Because even though we have all of the access to information and knowledge and YouTube and all of these research articles and reading abstracts, that information can be paralysis by analysis. So you still need those mentors. And so there's a lot of people out there who are really successful that did not want to be bothered by me. At the point when I started asking most people, they at least were aware of the project that I was trying to get done. Now, what's really cool about the track and field community is that most of the track and field community likes to share, and are more willing to share than, let's say, like a football coach or a professional basketball coach or whatever. They don't want to share anything, And what's funny is sometimes the reason why people don't want to share is because they then expose themselves to their lack of knowledge. That's kind of an interesting factor as well. Not to say that any of the coaches who declined me didn't have knowledge. I asked them because they had what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, a long-term success at many different places with many different populations. They proved over time they're doing something right. And it isn't illegal recruiting or steroids or anything like that. These people I asked to be a part of the book were people that I felt like didn't have those black check marks on their record, or their past. So when I presented them the idea, I presented it through the prism of, kind of the Wooden Project, and showed them a couple of my other articles, showed them some of the work that we did with the Wooden Project. And so once coaches kind of figured that out, and what was really cool is Keba Tolbert at Harvard and Tony Vinny, who's, one of the USATF instructors, they were on board right away with Elite Track. And because I was able to prime the pump a little bit by writing on a bunch of different websites, I knew that they at least had, okay, who's this random dude in the middle of Missouri at a high school that coaches only girls, and maybe has a couple national level athletes every now and again, but who is this guy? And so sometimes it's an awkward conversation, but one of the things I learned when I was in college is that, hey, if that pretty girl is sitting in your lecture hall and you never ask her out on a date, she's never going to say yes. You're going to make 0% of the shots you never take. And so I feel like, hey, if I feel like I've got something here, I think this is a cool project, a cool idea, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to ask for it, because you will only get told no. And what's the worst that can happen if you get told no? You just get to move on to a different person or a different group of people and pursue their knowledge. And what's really cool is once Dan Path got on board and Vince Anderson got on board and Keba and Tony were down from day one, it just blossomed and grew from there. And then I knew a couple really good high school coaches from all of my time doing all the different coaches education things and your USATF stuff. And I knew that those were really successful coaches as well. And they were more than willing to make this an official thing as opposed to just some kind of blockchain community thing that we were doing on elitetrack.com. So yeah, it made for some awkward conversations, especially when you get told no. But again, that's okay. Because some people I didn't think would say yes. I didn't think Vince Anderson would say yes. Vince Anderson not only said yes, he gave me like 60 pages of workouts. He's like, here you go. And a lot of coaches would say, ooh, I can't give you that because if I give you that stuff, well, maybe you'll be better than me or maybe you'll beat me down the line. And my philosophy has always been rising tide raises all ships. In track and field, every competitor in a track and field meet can't win. We know that. But every time an athlete toes the line, steps into the ring, steps onto the runway, they have a chance at a personal best, a season's best, a school record, a national record, whatever it may be. And so you can have every 8 lanes on a track or 9 lanes on a track can have something really great happen simultaneously. And then what's really cool is once you break down those barriers, like we had a young lady at my high school who ended up setting the national record in the 5,000 meters. Okay. And I had a guy who set a national record in the bench press in the same year at my high school. The kids saw that in person and they got better. But not only did they get better, the people they competed against got better as well, because they go, oh, that's actually possible. You can actually get that done. And I think the best track and field coaches understand that and are willing to share, because they know that it's only going to challenge them to be better once their knowledge is out there, but it's also going to help other people. And here's the reality. We already mentioned it. It all depends. We don't know everything. So when we are faced with a situation that we've never been faced before, and you've helped that other coach, now they feel more inclined to help you out. If they've got a solution to a problem that you've never thought of, or maybe they're better at the hammer than you are at the shot put. And you guys can, work through that as a community as opposed to an individual, which makes things so much better.
My personal experience from any interactions I've had with elite coaches has been they almost always have an abundancy mindset. Like they're always givers. They just they're the people who always say, listen, I don't have any secrets. And they're always the first people to say, I don't know. I actually don't know. This is why I do something, and they'll give you the rationale. But they've always had an abundancy mindset and never the scarcity mindset. Like I can only really think of one individual who had a kind of a scarcity mindset that I sat down and spoke with, but nearly everyone else in terms of high elite coaches, and just most coaches who I've interacted with have always seemed to have an abundancy mindset. Another
If you
thing,
had to guess, I mean, if you had to guess, why do you think that coach was that way? The one coach that you met, why do you think he was so, or she was so afraid to share?
can't say. All I can say is that everyone is the way they are for a reason. Who knows what happened in his life growing up? Or I just said he. It was a he. Who knows what happened in that coach's life that has led him to have that current mindset that he had when we spoke. Now that was a while ago. Things could have changed or not, but as I always say, I've said this repeatedly on many conversations, not just on podcasts, but because I'm fascinated with human behavior. Everyone is the way they are for a reason. We're so shaped by our environment and all the experiences that have gone in our lives. That they're huge factors into subconscious belief systems and the filters of how we see the world. And I can't sit here and say why. Just the coach who I spoke to was a bit closed off. It's a trust thing, really, with some people, but just that particular coach wasn't too willing to divulge a lot of information.
Yeah, and in fairness, too, I think that part of it is that some coaches aren't willing to share because maybe they've been screwed over before by somebody else, or somebody's taken credit for something they shouldn't have taken credit for. We're going to talk about it later, but I have a particular coach who has helped almost everybody out in our area. But it's kind of funny. He doesn't even necessarily want to take credit. It's kind of like, well, you've had success on your own. These people have had success, but it's like, but man, you're the reason. And so that's kind of interesting too. When you have one of those people that's almost humble to a fault. So
just continuing on before we move on to my next question. Just with Vince Anderson, I emailed Vince Anderson a question about wickets, and just like you were saying, he emailed like have such a detailed response and these Word docs about how he measured it all out. And he's like, he gave me his number, you need to ring or call. And I was like, holy bananas.
He's amazing. And you see his influence in terms of people really being able to dial in that drive phase at such a much more consistent level. Even all the way down to high school. And I know that he's not the inventor of that. I know the guys out at HSI and Otto Boland and Maurice Green and John Smith, but it's just neat to then see that, okay, here's how you do it. All right, now how do we teach that? And then Vince has designed a way on how to teach that, which is just really amazing. He's a great coach.
And just one final thing on this topic that we're discussing right now in terms of abundancy versus scarcity and people willing to share and the odd people who aren't as willing. I remember someone had asked Tim Ferriss one time. Tim put out his whole process of how he, came out with New York Times best-selling book, the exact process of how he done it. And the person said to me, "You're not kind of a bit scared, you're giving away your secrets?" And his whole thing was listen, he's like, first of all, I come from an abundancy mindset, again, kind of like you said, you like everyone to, what's the saying he said? All tides raise, what is it?
Oh, rising tide raises all ships. Absolutely.
Rising tide raises all ships. Yeah. That type of thing. Now, I'm not saying Tim said that, but that's the general premise he was getting at. But he made a really good point then. He was like, and to be honest, nobody's going to put the work in. I'll show you the exact plan. And he's like, you'll see how much work is involved. And people just won't do it because they're lazy. And the other thing too is that going back to there's no secrets. It's just you could get two chefs, the same recipe, but just one guy is just better at the application. Yeah. And then if you add to that to the different contexts and environments around, okay, here's this system. It's well, going back to what we've discussed already in terms of it depends. It's that system won't work in this context. So it's just why would you be scared to give away that information anyway? But I love the example of two chefs or Zach Evanesh. I've heard Travis Mash say it too. It's just you go to a coach and they're yeah, we squat. And it's yeah, we know most people squat, but it's just squatting with this coach at that facility around those athletes in that environment is very different to over here. So it's just there is no secrets. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's not the recipe. It's the cook. It always is the cook.
Exactly.
And the cook is the master. The cook is the one who takes the art or takes the science and blends it with art, but then also performs it.
Exactly.
Performance is an important factor to that as well. And when you look at how that plays out, and all these things cross over and connect to each other. The idea of rising tide raises all ships. But more importantly, I always want to avoid people who are oligarchs of knowledge. And what I mean by that is they're so desperate to control it, that they don't want to share. Think about like cancer research. If there's a medical company out there that's holding back some of the information on curing cancer, and the CEO of the company has created that situation, and then that CEO dies of cancer because there wasn't 20 other companies working on the same problem for the opportunity of solution, when that guy's on his deathbed, all he would want is more time, not money. And as us as coaches, it's the same idea. If I leave this world tomorrow, I want to provide something that will leave a legacy of helping other people. Because, and this is where we get back into the book, but one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I could never stay healthy. I got hurt all the time. And so, we had an athlete I told you about on offline. We had an athlete pull a hamstring muscle. That's the first time we've had a hamstring pull in 7 years. And why? Because I want to slow cook the meat. We spend 45 minutes every day warming up because I'm almost maybe too much, to the degree that I don't want my kids to get hurt. So I'm going to try to bolster them and prepare them with all these different exercises and drills and things like that. Because of my experience of getting hurt, I don't want kids to go through that. I want them to be able to compete at a high level uninjured. And so that's one of those demons that fuels me. And if there's anybody else out there that has kids in that situation or athletes, well, darn it, I don't want those kids who I don't even know, but I know they're having the same experience as I am. I don't want them to go through that. I want them to enjoy the sport without being derailed by an injury. So we're helping everyone out, and that makes me feel good. There's purpose there.
Sharing is caring, people. That sounds like a good movie too, that you came up with a good plot line there. That he had the information, and then, like, ironically, he got cancer, and then he didn't. He needed more time. Sounds like you're writing your second book, a very different book than your first one. So anyway, continue on with the book. Let's get into these 5 models. So again, 5 models were the minimalist approach, adapt or die, concurrent, long to short, and the flow approach, or the flow state. So the minimalist approach, we know Mr. Corfus was in this category. One of my favorite things I've heard you say is you were like to Chris. So, like, what kind of coach are you? Long to short, short to long? And he's like, I'm short to short.
Yeah, and we always joke about laugh out loud moments, but when I read that, I was like, that's hilarious, because it's true.
It's classic Chris too, if you know.
Yeah. Well, and I've never got to meet him face to face, but I've been told that he's like hilarious in real life.
I've just spoken to him twice online with podcasts, but he's hilarious.
Yeah, he's a funny, Chicago suburb type guy too. They have their own kind of sense of humor and everything as well. But the idea there is that, what's the minimal effective dose, and why do anything else that takes away from the most critical thing that we want them to be good at, which is absolute speed. And so, when I asked him that, it's very interesting when you look at the plan and the training system. There's lots of days off where the kids don't do anything. And, Corfist and Tony are very similar, but, Tony's done it at scale. He's scaled it up. And Chris does it more, at an individual level with his training, because they're kind of in different spheres, so to speak, but they're both in the same community, which is kind of interesting as well. But in both ways, as an individual kind of coach who coaches just maybe the sprinters, and then Tony, who's a head coach of a team who also focuses mostly on sprints, they've been able to replicate this system that's allowed for these athletes to be really, really successful. So, if you look at what they're able to do in the 100 and the 200 and the 4x1 and the 4x2, they've been extraordinarily successful mentoring and guiding athletes to state championships and individual championships. So what's really interesting about this minimalist system is that they only have what's called 19 lactate type workouts, and they call it the lactate war zone. And some coaches that I know would look at the stuff that they do, it would say, well, that's not really even lactate war zone. That's minimalist in and of itself too. And Tony admits it. They only have I think it's 9 or 10 lactate type workouts throughout the year. And that includes the track meets that they do. Now, why have they developed this system? Well, first of all, Tony in his life experience talked about how track and field took the joy out of competing, because he would just go out there and run these crazy long workouts and terrible workouts. And the idea, we're going to get you in shape, we're going to put a base in. And meanwhile, by the end of the season, if you've survived, maybe you run a good time, or maybe you ran a good time a month earlier before the season was over. And so when he had heard this kind of conversation be put forth by Chris Corfist and others, he's like, well, this is what high school athletics should be. Kids should enjoy coming to practice. And so now, just running 10s and 20s isn't going to get the job done. Again, it's, well, how are you doing it? The why, right, is we figured that out. But now, how is the next question you have to answer. And so the how is, if you're having these kids run 10s and 20s and it's very, very, very short, then it's got to be amped up. People got to be pumped. So they have kids run what's called the gauntlet. And they will line kids up down the track, screaming and yelling and playing music and hooping and hollering. And they've got them all, strapped into either free lap systems or some other kind of timing device. And these kids, it is just as competitive as a track meet would be for those 10 to 20 meters. And in order to do that, why they do that is to try to elicit that neurological response to do the absolute speed that they need to get to actually make a person fire their stretch shortening cycle faster in order to get that done. And so it's still really intense, even though it's really not that much in terms of meters of distance. It's kind of like maxing out on the bench press. Well, it might not be this long, arduous hour-and-a-half bodybuilding session, but if you get under, 355 pounds for a one set max for your first time ever, that's going to be pretty exhausting, and that's going to be pretty intense. And that's kind of the philosophy that Tony and Chris have, but on the track, where it's like, we're going to do the least amount that we need to do that we know works, and we're going to work on just improving absolute speed wherever we can. Then they hold the athletes accountable by using a system called record, rank, and publish, which then they basically, every week, the kids are held accountable to their times. Are they improving? And then where do they rank amongst their teammates? And so these kids set PRs in 10s and 20s, which of course requires pretty accurate timing, so that when you get into those, hundredths of a second, that those kids have improved. And then they're indoors in Chicago, so they can get that type of speed work done in the winter and build that over a long period of time. Because anything you do neurologically, it takes like 500 hours of doing something to rewire your whole nervous system to improve it or to change it. And so they're doing it all the time to try to attack that problem. And then they use track meets as kind of their more speed endurance or special endurance or lactate workouts. And they can do that because they have an indoor and an outdoor season. So they're running track and field for another 2 months than most people do in the South, so to speak, that don't maybe have indoor track. They're playing basketball or wrestling or whatever, which gives them the ability to kind of implement that system and get kids done. And their kids are never tired, in terms of from training. They're always fresh. They want to come. And then they usually have a day where they send the kids home and they don't even allow them to come to practice. They get in trouble if they show up. And so that's kind of how that system works in a very, very, very general explanation.
Just for the listeners, Tony is Tony Holler. I don't think he said a second name there. Just another thing there. Where are you coming up with those 500 hours?
So that was a research that was presented at a speed summit in Las Vegas, like all the way back in 2007. It was one of the USATF, like whatever they called that at the time, like ultra coaches seminars or something like that they were talking about. It just really takes a really, really long time to change something that you do in a gross pattern over a long period of time. So I'd have to go back and look at that DVD. I was taking the guy's word for it,
You shouldn't do that, Banta. Never blindly accept what anyone says.
We just know that speed grows like a tree, which is one of the things that Tony Holler talked about. And with the Feed the Cat system, by the way, if you're trying to look him up there for the listeners, But in Tony Holler's view, he looks at that. So it's like, hey, a tree's growing every day, but day to day, you might not notice it.
Yeah.
But every day that tree needs sunlight and that tree needs water. And so that sunlight and water.
And so do we, by the way, people.
Yes.
So get into the sun.
Get outside. Walk around while you're listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
But so that's that kind of idea. And it's the same thing. So if you've got these high school athletes for only 4 years, well, you got to get going. You can't be going slow and building a base. Your kid will never get fast. We need to be fast right away. And so that's kind of that philosophy.
Dan Fast's favorite word, base.
Yeah.
A base of what? That's work specific capacity. Yes. Just before I move on, really good point you made there, and I just want to reiterate it. Keeping the process fun. And the more I've grown as a coach, and the more my career has gone on as a coach, like the concept of just keeping the process fun has just like the importance of that is just always being like just renewed over and over again. And I'll never forget actually, somebody asking Dan Pfaff, what's the secret? They didn't say that, but they're like, what's the one key ingredient? They're like, you could like the whole room, like, here it is. Here's the magic. He's about to tell us the whole deal. And he just goes, fun.
Yeah.
Training has to be fun. If it's not fun, he's like, one, they'll probably stop showing up. And two, he says they'll never give their full to the whole process. It has to be fun. And it's a big thing that I preach now in terms of whenever I'm discussing training processes for either a athlete or a team, so a group of athletes, that listen, this process, it needs to be fun. And for it to be fun, it has to be intrinsically driven. I had a really good conversation with Adam Fight, who was on the podcast there a while back from Precision Nutrition. Adam is a very veteran coach. I mean, he's worked in he's been a strength and conditioning coach at the highest levels in college for football. He's been in the NFL. He's currently doing a PhD in Springfield College right now, and he's doing a lot of his research in self-determination theory. So, motivation, so he's taking a lot of work from self-determination theory from Dossie and Ryan. And the three components of that are competency, relatedness, and autonomy. So they're huge things that, if you want someone to become intrinsically driven to the process, there are three things they need. So competency, relatedness, and autonomy. So owning some of the process. And the only way people will want to own it is if it's fun.
Yeah. Well, and what's really interesting too, to build off of that, there's research that's been done, which I was reading recently through my master's for positive performance psychology. And they did a study where they asked athletes, well, who was your best coach? And why were they your favorite coach? And it very rarely was the coach understood the X's and O's. The coach understood the training theory. It was the coach. I really liked my coach because of the relationship they built with me. And part of that, having a positive relationship, is, like you said, those three factors that as a coach, you can kind of shepherd the athlete through that, but you shouldn't be dragging them with a chain, and I think that that's really important.
Unless it's pro sport.
Yeah.
Mike Boyle had a real funny thing one time. He was like, we'd had this discussion, and Mike would be the very person who would agree with what we just spoke about there, because Mike was the one who really sort of put out, that quote. And do you know a quote, or famous quotes, and you see it it's attributed to so many different people. It's like, oh, it was Teddy Roosevelt, or it was Jim Rohn. It nearly always goes back to Jim Rohn, but anyway. But Mike always says, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. He always says that repeatedly. But even Mike sometimes, he's like, well, but sometimes, that saying, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, sometimes you just got to get that horse's head and just dunk it in until it drinks. When he was talking about some really difficult athletes at a collegiate level, he's like, listen, this is Division I college. You have to get this shit done. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, and that's where hopefully, over time, it's like, you're going to do this now, and then later you're going to understand, and then later you're going to like me and do it on your own.
It's like reflecting back when you were young with your parents, at the time you were like, screw them. And you're like, you know what? They were actually 100% in the right. I was completely wrong there. Because I was under 25, my prefrontal cortex hadn't stopped growing yet.
Yeah, we weren't fully human at that point yet,
Yeah.
Ladies, by the way, men take a lot longer for that to get developed than you do. So if you're frustrated with the guys, just understand that that's because we're not yet quite yet there.
That's good. All right. So adapt or die was the second approach.
Yeah. So what's interesting about adapt or die, if you look at it on the track, it's going to look a lot like the minimalist system, except it's going to have more of additions of speed endurance. So you're going, and again, now what's interesting about speed endurance is there's the classical understanding and then there's the realistic understanding. So the realistic understanding of speed endurance is it's basically how long can you maintain your speed over your choice event? So like a maximum effort over your choice event. So for like a 100-meter person, that could be anywhere from 80 to 120 meters was where you're training for speed endurance. For a 200-meter person, it could be a 150 to a 220. For a 400-meter person, it could be a 350 to a 450. And I know people are like, well, then that gets into special endurance. I don't care. We're keeping it really simple. It's just the ability to endure that speed over basically the course of your distance of the whatever your chosen event may be. So there's a little bit more of that in the adapt or die, but the intensities are through the roof. So these people are running a 150, they're running a 150 all out, and so then what has to happen with that system is then you have a huge recovery in between. The other part of the adapt or die system is there's a heavy emphasis on depth jumping and plyometrics through depth jumping. And so you're doing, hey, I'm standing on a 2-foot box, I'm stepping off, boom, I'm hopping over a hurdle and I'm running out, and you're just loading up that system. And then also, which, Tony and Chris do some plyometric stuff, but I don't know they do the same loading that you see in the Tony Wells system, which is this adapt or die. And then the additional thing to Tony Wells's, which Core Fist and Holler aren't as big of fans are of the traditional heavy lifting. So very, very heavy, high percentage singles, doubles, and triple reps on the bench, the squat, the deadlift, the power clean, the snatch. And so they're loading those up as well. Now, in the Tony Holler system, the Tony Wells system, the adapt or die system, they also expect that you're going to be ready to run at full force competition within like 6 weeks. Like you're going to be ready to rock. Like we're not dilly-dallying along. Like, and I know 6 weeks sounds like a long time, but it's like you should be at your fastest time that you're going to be at for the year, the fastest you can possibly be within 6 weeks. And then we're going to ride that. And then we're going to load and unload it over and over again to allow you to do that. And then what Tony Wells did with the adapt or die system is he would use the power clean, the standing long jump, the vertical leap, the flying 10, 20, or 30 as measuring sticks for what needed to be improved moving forward. So if the block start seemed to be like a problem, and they would use the standing long jump and they would see that correlate. Oh, this kid's not doing as well on the standing long jump. Okay, we need to attack that. Oh, the time's not reflecting what they need to do in the flying 10. Then we need to go and attack that in our training process. The kid doesn't look as powerful or strong. We need to attack that in the weight room. And so, but also Tony Wells understood because you're riding these high intensities all the time that they're also going to need a lot of recovery. So as, with the minimalist system, Tony's sending kids home, once a week or twice a week or whatever. Tony Wells with the adapt or die system would have entire phases, or microcycles built into the program where there would be tons and tons of recovery built in to allow the kid to basically heal up before they beat the mess out of them again with the intense depth jumping, plyometrics, and sprints and stuff like that.
I believe the scientists call it super compensation.
Correct. And so we're looking for that not only every 48 hours or 24 hours. And we know that not all the bodily systems work on that anyway. But they're looking at that as part of the trained system where they're putting that in to allow for that. And then I would assume that they're probably also trying to target high quality competitions in those weeks where there's some recovery as well, when the legs feel a little bit fresher. So they're going after that. But when they're not, then they're beating the mess out of them. They're hitting them hard. And so the things that you have to be aware of in that system is you have to be very careful of lower leg injuries. those are going to be a problem. Stress fractures, stress reactions, footwear is going to be very important. A coach is going to need to pay a lot of attention to the contacts on the ground in the plyometrics in order to survive that system. And way more important in the weight room is that if these kids are moving heavy weight, they better darn well know how to move that weight before they start moving that heavy weight, because this system is very intense. You're talking 90% maximum efforts in the weight room, 95% maximum efforts in absolute speed, heavy loads on the plyometrics, large drops from high surfaces. So the system works. Currently, probably the two coaches that are the master of the system the best is Curtis Taylor at Oregon. He's the sprint coach there for both the men and the women. And then Carol Smith Gilbert, who is the USC's head coach. She's probably also, in fact, she was coached by Tony Wells. So if anybody really knows that system the best, it's probably her.
Is there a lot of therapy with that system too?
Absolutely. So like Altus does the trackside therapy and, you know, and all of that. You're going to have people that are really good at keeping athletes able to compete. You know, a good chiropractor, a good physio, you're going to have a good massage therapist, all of that stuff to support that system. And for high school coaches, that becomes pretty tough because the trainer is usually overwhelmed in our building. But in a collegiate system and a pro system like Altus, they can absolutely get that stuff done.
There was something I was going to ask. Oh yeah, and just before we go on to the concurrent model, just with the adaptive eye model, there is there an emphasis and then a retention within that model, or is it just where it's fucking balls to the walls on everything, speed, strength, plyos, or is there some phasic structure to it where like is it more like, you know, general heavy strength plyo and it gets more specific towards the sprint, and while they may maintain just the strength and power from previous blocks?
All three of the main drivers there, the plyometrics, the high intensity sprinting, and the high intensity weight room, are happening all at the same time, always. Yeah. But what drives what you emphasize is, again, they test a lot. So they use the tests that are very controlled and able to be specifically measured. So those significant digits, you know what I mean, are reliable. Yeah. And so they use that as a means to decide what they're going to do in that next phase.
I'm sure too, like the training age of the athlete too. You know, probably, you know, if you're more novice, you'll get more from general training, like so strength and maybe the plyo work. But then, you know, as your training age increases, you probably need to go to more specifics of more actual sprint work and event work, while they're probably just maintaining like over the course of like an athlete's career, like.
Absolutely. So if you look at Anatoly Bondarchuk's work on the transfer of training, I don't know if you've read those books and looked at the charts or anything.
Correct. Of course I have read those, the correlation charts, Dr. Yes. B. Yeah, so the hammer throwers, the classic hammer throwers in the bench press. The novices, when their bench went up, the throw went up. With the elites, when they kept benching, their throws went backwards. He was like, we need just to throw more.
Yeah, exactly. So the more, as you get more advanced, the more specific the work has to become. Yeah. So, you know, again, like sprinters, for example, you know, what correlates? Sprinting. But then outside of that, early on, weight room, getting them stronger, building what I call building the dragster's tires, you know, those hot rod cars, right? But then once those tires are built, then we've got to be able to twitch and we've got to be able to move. And the best thing then, when they get more and more advanced, is to move to, you know, more plyometric type of training, because, you know, plyometrics and sprinting mimic each other very well. And what's interesting is for some of your athletes at the beginning of the season, what you emphasize won't be what you emphasize at the end of the season, because they start to move through that speed model. And as they move through that speed model, then that stuff's not going to continue to improve them. So it has to blend more towards that specific training as you move forward, which everybody kind of knows, but it has to not only be more emphasized, it has to be done at a different intensity as well as the athlete improves. So same thing, like in the 400-meter dash, as an athlete becomes better in the 400-meter dash, the aerobic component of the 400 becomes less emphasized because they spend less time needing that aerobic system to get them around the track. And so as an athlete improves and becomes more and more advanced and more elite, that aerobic aspect of that event is minimalized. Yeah.
Interesting. Concurrent, fill us in.
Yeah. So concurrent system is kind of a system that
And just for you going, you put yourself in this category, did you?
I do. I'm in this category as well. And the godfather of the system is an Australian sprint coach known as Mike Hurst. And so the idea is when I'm building an athlete, I want to cast a wide net, and he wants to cast a wide net. So we want to do all of the classical things that an athlete probably needs all the time. And so then what I like to do is I like to work on a 10-day cycle so we can try to get everything in. So every athlete should be doing maximum velocity sprinting. Every athlete should accelerate. Every athlete should be doing speed endurance. Every athlete should be doing special endurance. Every athlete should be doing some sort of lactic tolerance or hydrogen ion tolerance. Every athlete should be doing plyometrics. They should be lifting weights, And so you've got to do all of those things, and all of those things need to happen all the time. And then what you do as an athlete is you move, or as a coach, you move them through different variations of all those workouts, but they're seeing it all the time. And that way it's not like, well, all we're going to do this, this season is work on flying 20s. Well, but then they might not be able to run the 400. Okay, well, all we're going to do this season is we're going to work on our lactic tolerance. Well, great. They're really tough, but they can't run fast. So it's like you've got to do all of this stuff. And then over the course of those 10 days, and then you do another 10-day cycle and another 10-day cycle, and your 6 to 3 month training phase is over. You've improved that athlete globally. They're a better overall athlete in everything that they need to be athletic. And that's, for me as a high school coach, and maybe even most college coaches, you don't even really know what the athlete really can do yet, and you don't know what might be their best event. So if you only emphasize one aspect of training, then you've basically painted that athlete into a corner. So the concurrent system's value is it casts a wide net. It improves them over a variety of different things, which should, if done correctly, should give athletes the ability to run all the way down to the 100 and run pretty competitively, and race all the way up to the 800 if you're a sprint coach and be competitive. The disadvantage of the system is, again, if you're dealing with an elite athlete and you kind of know what they're able to do, you might be spending too much time away from the things that they need to get better, but you also aren't emphasizing something so much with so much frequency that you probably also give the athlete a little bit of time to recover from whatever that type of training may be. Because, running flying 20s feels very different than running a short recovery repeat 200 workout. Both can be exhausting, but in a different way. Benching 350 pounds in the weight room for a rep of 1 is going to feel tiring, but it's going to be very tiring in a different way than running an all-out 45-second distance trial. Let's see how far you can get in 45 seconds. So I think by having these different systems in place where I'm going to target these 10 things, and over the course of 10 days, we're going to see that stuff, and then we're going to come back to it, I think is very valuable. And the concurrent system is really good in that. You can provide athletes the ability to run a lot of stuff. So that's kind of that system.
And again, similar to the question I asked with the adapt or die, do you fluctuate volumes and intensities? Like, do you emphasize certain qualities in a phasic structure and retain other qualities?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been talking about recently, I did another video on it, is that the system that we kind of have coined is called the critical mass system. So what we try to do is we start off with small volumes and a little bit lower intensities, but they're still nearing what needs to happen for that athlete to be able to be good at whatever we're trying to do. So like, instead of starting with like 20 meters, we might start with 300 meters. But instead of doing multiple reps of 300s, it might be 1 rep of a 300 and then 2 reps of 150 with huge recoveries. But then as the season moves along, you might get all the way up to a classical Clyde Hart type of thing with a 450. And then, you might be running 4 200s or something like that with huge recoveries. And so you do that. The other part of the system that ends up happening is as you move forward, there might be a different emphasis for each week. So like week 1 might be a speed orientated week, but still it's concurrent. So you're going a little bit faster, but your workouts are still, you're still going to have a speed endurance workout. You still might have a tempo workout. You still might have a special endurance workout, but it's going to look a little bit different than the other weeks. So then week 2 might be a power week. So now it's more based on medicine ball throws and weight room and vests and pulling the sled and running up hills for a power week. But you're still going to do some of the same type of workouts with just that tweak to it to make it more power orientated. And then you'll follow up that next week with what would be called an endurance week. So the volumes would probably be a little bit larger. There'd be a lot more work. Acceleration would be in there, but it might accelerate out. Instead of just doing 30-meter accelerations, you might accelerate out 30 meters and then run an 80, off the back end of that. So that's how that would look different. And then the 4th week would be a recovery week. But that's once you get to that volume or that amount of work. So in the classical concurrent system, Mike Hurst has what he calls his general preparation phase that he keeps recycling throughout the season between different phases of training. And so he'll recycle that in for a couple of weeks and then get back to whatever he wants to emphasize for that, those different biomotor abilities in those different workouts. And then he'll ride that for a few weeks, and then he'll come back to the general preparation phase again and kind of unload some of the intensity and build the volume up, and then come back to the intensity and cut the volume again. And so, but no matter what, they're still accelerating. They're still running at maximum velocity. They're still doing speed and special endurance throughout the season. It's just different things are emphasized over those courses of either a different phase or a different microcycle.
Who does Mike mainly work with in terms of athlete population?
So Mike works with mostly 400-meter runners in Australia. And 2 of his athletes were on Australia's relay world championship team that was in Japan. And he coached what used to be the the Australian women's record holder, and still the men's Australian record holder are both people that he's coached underneath his belt. He was heavily influenced by Charlie Francis, but Charlie Francis's training in terms of intervals and distances are very different than what Mike does. But good coaches take from other good coaches all the time. So.
All right, last 2 models, long to short.
So long to short is your traditional Clyde Hart system. So when people look at that, a lot of people probably hear me say, "Oh, well, I run 450s. Oh, you must be a long to short guy." No. In the critical mass system that we run, which I just talked about, is very different. We start off with smaller group, we get to bigger, and then we ride the intensity and load and unload. In the classical long to short system, you're starting off with your largest volumes of everything at the beginning of the year. And as the year goes along, the intensity drops. The intensity goes up and the volume drops. So at the beginning of the season, on a Monday, they run 200s. And they run like what people would call tempo 200s. And they run 24. And then as they unload the number of 200s, the speed of the 200s gets faster. They'll run cross-country runs of 15, 20 minutes. They'll run 1,000 repeats and things like that at the beginning of the season. And as the season moves along, they get closer and closer and more specific to what would be called special endurance training. That would be stuff you would expect to see in a 400-meter program. And
Ryan, just to ask, would those volumes be across the board, would the 100 and 200 meter sprinters be doing these volumes, or would the 400 meter sprinter be doing that type of volume, and then it's a little less for a 1 and 200 meter runner?
Well, I can't speak to recent stuff because, Coach Ford has worked with kind of the short sprinters over there, and then Coach Hart, as he's kind of retired, he's completely retired now, but before he completely retired, he was basically just working with the 400 meter group. I know that the 400 meter group did that. I don't know that the 100 and 200 kids have done that in the last 10 years.
Yeah, those volumes are scandalous.
Yeah, they're massive. But the reality is what he's trying. Now, here's the other thing that people don't know is that one of the things that, and I talked to Coach Hart at length about this. One of the things that people don't understand is that Coach Hart still had speed training in his sessions. There would be sessions that would be dedicated to running as fast as you could run. The thing that he took out of his sessions is speed endurance. So he wouldn't run 150s. And the reason why, Mike Johnson, who he used to, was his big crown jewel in his system, would get hurt. He would pull his hamstrings. He would have muscle pulls when he would run the extended speed endurance stuff. So he would go really short and run 30s, 60s, and 90s super fast. And then he would go really, really, really long with those other workouts, but he would not spend a lot of time. So he'd do a lot of special endurance, if you're going to use the right verbiage, and he would run a lot of absolute speed, max velocity, acceleration, but he would never do any speed endurance after Mike got hurt. That was something he took out of his system. So a lot of people see those volumes and they go, oh my God, that's super crazy. Yeah, it is. It's large. It's really large. And I wouldn't, looking at that system, I wouldn't run the 200s on Monday, because you're kind of taking a little bit out of the athlete's legs when you're wanting to get to that critical mass intensity and critical mass volume that you want from that particular length of an interval. So I would rather do the 200s that aren't at full speed anyway on a Tuesday, after the athlete's already kind of exhausted the central nervous system on a Monday, either doing whatever your emphasis might be. It could be special endurance, could be speed endurance, could be acceleration, max velocity. Those all require a much more fresh central nervous system than the tempo work does. So
much lifting in that system.
They lift weights, but it's traditional lifting weights. There's not like, hey, this is what we do or we don't do. I think it's more of a traditional weight system, from the athletes that I've had that have been a part of Baylor's program. They really like the Roman deadlift a lot. That's a big part of their program back in the day. And I know that one of my athletes, when she came back from her freshman year at Baylor, she got a lot bigger in the caboose and a lot bigger in the quads. So I know that they were lifting. She wasn't getting the freshman 15 from boozing out. I can tell you that. She was muscled up and jacked up. Yeah. So, but I can only speak to, again, that was about 10 years ago was the last time that I had one of my girls there. We've had a couple guys go there from other places that are part of our club. But it's more of a traditional weightlifting system from what I've seen. But yeah, they support that with the weightlifting. And as the season moves along, the intensity goes up, the volume drops. And so there's always kind of that scary part of a long to short season where those things cross over, where the intensity is coming up and the volume has yet not gotten small enough. And so you have to be very careful in that phase where you have the crossover of intensity and volume as a coach, that you make sure you're keeping your kids healthy at that point. I would say that would be one of the other things you need to be very careful of in that system.
Yeah, listen, that's great stuff. So on to the final system now, which is the flow approach. One thing I actually did ask you this last time we spoke is you put Dan into this category, but I suppose Dan, because you even mentioned you kind of use a 10-day cycle within your approach too. Dan's approach is concurrent as well, really. But I'll let you explain why you put him into the flow state. I know you put Dan and Stu and sort of got the kind of Altus guys into this last model.
Yeah, so to become a flow state coach, and to answer your question specifically, it doesn't mean that you don't have things that you kind of have that are truths. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you don't have things that you don't go to all the time. You absolutely do have those things because those methods work. So for example, everybody in my program, not to say I'm a flow state coach, but everybody in my program, even the distance runners, they lift weights. Every kid in my program lifts weights. Why? Because every high school kid is pretty much underpowered until they're not underpowered. And then you have to adjust. I told you about that athlete that I had that came back from Baylor. Obviously, she actually got too big. So, we, through some mentorship and some guidance, we kind of talked to her about, you probably need to back that off or change that a little bit. Because, the college strength and conditioning.
Your caboose are too big.
Yeah.
Caboose. I love that word. Yeah. Caboose are too big.
Her butt. So, it was one of those things where you have these things that you work and you do. So, but every kid has a different challenge that they provide you. I had a young lady who we called her Grandmama. And when she was a sprinter for us, she'd run a Monday workout really great. And then she'd be totally trashed for 3 days. And so we realized, this kid can't handle our concurrent system. She's got to be in the Tony Holler type of system, because she couldn't handle the plyometrics either. She wasn't very elastic off the ground. So doing some depth jumps in the Tony Wells adapt or die system would not be very good for her, and she wasn't very strong to begin with. And there was, no matter how much lifting weights we would have done with her, it wouldn't have changed anything. So we used that system, and she ended up being all state on a relay for us, both in the 4x2 and 4x1. And she was a state semi-finalist in the 100-meter dash, and this is a kid that you would have, I mean, she was running terrible times at the beginning of the year because we just couldn't figure it out. And we go, oh, this kid isn't lazy. This kid's body is just very different. So even though like Dan has a system, so like he does his, what is it? Two on, one off, one on, one off kind of rotation. So he'll do that too. He rotates different emphases of weeks, but there's different athletes that provide different challenges and experiences. So for example, Coach Andreas, who's out there, he has a system that he uses. He has a menu system where he'll literally give, okay, you've got to do an acceleration block. Here are your multiple options for acceleration. You got to do a maximum velocity block. Here's your menu of the maximum velocity activities. And Coach Andreas is so comfortable with giving that up to the athlete when they're traveling overseas and he's out in the Arizona desert, that he's comfortable with letting him do it. And then what Dan Path said that I thought was really interesting is that if the athlete is not having success in a particular area and they're using the menu system, then part of their conversations as they debrief the phase or the seasons, they'll be like, hey, you kept doing this block over here with this particular thing, but you never did any speed endurance and you couldn't finish off a race, or you couldn't run the rounds. Maybe we need to put some of that back into your training so that you can finish off a race or run the rounds. And so there's always this constant conversation. And again, you might have your system, but hey, just because it says in the book, I've got to do 4 times 150 race model today, but the kid looks like crap after 2, or the kid's not running well through 150, but looks great through 120, then a flow state coach is going to make that adjustment. A flow state coach is going to make that adjustment to say, hey, this kid, I really like running the 400, but this kid's not good at the 400, doesn't train right at the 400, doesn't seem to tolerate the 400. I'm going to move it down and we're going to unload the volumes and we're going to move over here. So even though my structure of my system, so like the theme of the day might be the same, like today's a power day, today's a lactic tolerance day, tomorrow's a active recovery day, and Thursday's a maximum velocity day. Even though those themes might remain the same, what you do in that concurrent system or whatever system you abide by, you're going to adjust as you move forward. And that shows mastery. But it's hard to do that as a young coach, going all the way back to our conversation here at the beginning with Gary Winkler. I just wanted the workouts. And then I didn't even realize there's progressions of these workouts that are in there. Or I didn't even know what the acronym of that workout meant and the purpose of it. I was like, ooh, that just looks cool. Let's do that. Or Coach Path told me that it takes 500 hours to change a neurological thing. So I'm just going to believe him, as opposed to starting to figure some of that stuff out for yourself or how it applies to the population in which you work with.
Yeah. And it's nice. Spent 3 months at Alta, so I got first-hand experience of seeing how the guys operate on a day-to-day basis. And, the one word for it is mastery, So it was an absolute pleasure to spend that time out there. Yeah. Listen, Banta, this has been an outstanding conversation. Just wrapping up, just 1 or 2 little quick fire round questions for you.
Sure.
What were the biggest lessons you learned and the biggest things you took away from writing this book?
Well, the biggest thing that I realized is, and this is kind of a weird one because it's not going to be maybe what you expect, but that if you've been told in your life you can't do something, but if you practice long enough at it and you work long enough at it and it's important to you, you can become very good at it. I was born with a disability, dysgraphia. So when I write, I skip words all the time. My penmanship was terrible. And so writing, every time I tried to write a paper, I'd get grounded because my parents, you made this mistake in this sentence or this paper, you messed this up. And I'd be like,
very understanding parents.
Yeah. I get so frustrated and, I would get grounded all the time because I would just get so mad. I hated doing it. And one of the things when I grew a little bit older is I was in a weird situation where I had special school district services, which is like for kids who struggle academically, but I was also in the gifted program at my school because I had a high IQ, but these disabilities were problematic. And I remember these two women talking, who one was the gifted advisor and then one was my special school district advisor. They're like, well, I don't understand. How can his test scores be this high, but academically he's over here? And I just remembered it stuck with me because I was like, gosh darn it, I need to stop using my disability as a crutch. I need to figure out ways that I can still be successful in spite of this. So it takes me twice as long to read as other people do. I have to reread pages all the time. When I write, and even in the Sprinter's Compendium, you'll see there's some grammar errors throughout there. But I think that people who've heard me talk or kind of understand what I'm getting at, and sprint coaches, they know they're like, okay, I understand the sentence, even though this word might not be the exact choice word you would like to have here. So that's the biggest thing, is that you can accomplish things you don't think you're very good at, and you can get a lot better at them. You can become a better reader. You can become a better writer. You can become healthier. You can become stronger. You can be more proficient at anything you want to do. Now, I'm not necessarily telling you after 10,000 hours, you can become an NBA center, because you got to still be 7 foot tall. But there are things you can get a lot better at. From a training perspective, I was very set in my ways on how I thought you could get things done. And after reaching out to a lot of these people and intentionally trying to pick people that have different viewpoints than I do, I realize more and more why they do it. And I realize that there are value in that. And it kind of pulled the shades back from my eyes a little bit on some athletes who I might have thought were just lazy, and realized they're not lazy. They just need different training. They need a different system. They're not pretending to be hurt. They're blown up from this workout. So you need to create some other systems and adjustments to maximize that kid's abilities. So things like that.
Just two things there. One, grounded. Like, do parents still ground kids? Remember back in the, he was like, you're grounded. Go up to your room with your iPad and iPhone and your TV, and such a punishment nowadays. The other thing, the other thing I'll say to you, I actually never knew people use the expression "gosh darn it." I thought that was just a thing in TV shows. Gosh darn it.
No, being a public school teacher and being a little bit of a public figure, I have to be very careful with my language. If we were offline, I might sound like a drunken sailor. But
yeah, you have to remember, I'm from Ireland here. Irish people have no problem with that. You'd actually disappoint Irish people, if you say gosh darn it.
I'm sure there's a few mad at me right now.
Did you just say gosh darn it? He just wasted, and all the Irish people listen to this, like, he just wasted the perfect opportunity to swear, to give a good swear. He just wasted it, and he's not getting it back. Last two here for you. What is your top book recommendation? And it can be anything, not just training. And what are you currently reading?
Okay, so I'm currently reading the book Legacy, which is kind of about the All Blacks.
Yeah.
It's great, and I'm really I've just got it started. It was given to me as a gift from one of my students who, felt like it would be a book I would enjoy, and so far I'm enjoying it a lot.
Very good.
And the other book that I would recommend more recently that I finished is a book called The Culture Code, which is written by Daniel Coyle, and it's basically just, what do successful groups of people do? What's their culture look like? How do they accomplish the successful things that they've done? What is the ways that they communicate? And it's amazing. It is a really good read and a very powerful book in terms of communication and, again, somewhat of a positive psychology, but with groups as opposed to individuals. I find that to be very valuable. Steve Magnus's book that's been out for a little bit, not the most recent one because I haven't read that one yet. I don't want to say I'm reading something I'm not reading, but the Peak Performance book that he wrote about 2 years ago is phenomenal. And I think that that's really good for just people that just want discipline in their life and to learn how to perform at a high level in a variety of different ways.
And tell me this, are you reading those books because of the masters you're doing? Is that one of the reasons?
No, actually, it's funny. Again, kind of a weird thing. When you're forced to read a book, you don't want to read it, but then book sitting over there and you're like, man, I really want to read that one. It's a very weird thing. But no, none of those books were read because of positive performance.
I was just wondering. Yeah, I was just wondering. Where are you doing that master's, just out of interest?
So the University of Missouri has an online program that was developed by Dr. Rick McGuire. And he's kind of the founder of American sports psychology. And I felt like one of the things that I wanted to really improve upon as a coach is having different strategies, not only from the physical side of things, like the book behind me,
Yeah.
but also the idea of, I've got different kids with different personalities. I need to figure out how to connect with all of them, not just as a coach, but in the classroom, because I have no options there. Those kids don't get to get out of my classroom, and I don't get to get rid of them. So I've got to figure out, how do I improve those relationships with those kids? And I mean, kids generally like me, but it was one of those things. But what about that 10% that walk in with devil horns and a pitchfork and fire? How can I improve my relationship with even the most difficult child? And it's been probably, in my life as an educator, the most valuable professional development I've ever done. It's made me a much better teacher and a much better coach.
Yeah, great stuff. I concur with you in regards to, when you're forced to read a book. What came to my mind there is, it's funny, like when people say to me, "Oh, how's the college work going?" And I'm always like, "Well, the apartment's clean, and all these books that have nothing to do with my course I've read and finished." It's like every other aspect of your life is organized because you're just procrastinating on what you should be doing. It's like
absolutely,
the apartment is clean, the bills are paid. I've read all these books that have nothing to do with my course, but I just read them. It's just so funny, yeah, exactly. All right, last one for you, and all I'd say to you is do your best here, because the amount of times I've asked this question and people are all like, "Oh, I can't, like I have to think about it." So just whatever comes to mind, just be in the moment. Use the flow system here for this. I'm taking you for dinner, and you can bring 5 people to this dinner, dead or alive. Who would you invite to this dinner and why? So 5 people, if you can name 5 people. And immediate family doesn't count. So like a wife or a child, but like say like a deceased relative, they would count.
Okay.
And the person can be real or a fictional character. So like it could be Batman, or it could be it could be Jesus. I just said that one. All the religions.
All right. I don't think I'm worthy of Jesus. So, I mean, I'm a fan of the guy. JC and I have a relationship, but he smites me quite often. But I would say, first of all, gosh darn it, I need a piece of paper because I'm going to have to remember who I said. So, Teddy Roosevelt for sure. Teddy Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt. Okay. Who was the other one?
2 Roosevelts.
Both of the Roosevelts. Oh gosh darn it. Oh my God. Usain Bolt for sure.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt and Usain Bolt, 2 big characters in terms of their personalities. That'd be
yes, absolutely. It would make for interesting dinner conversation. Abraham Lincoln for sure.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King. All right. And that's at 5. That's me 5.
Great.
So
you no problem with that.
Yeah. So Teddy Roosevelt is my favorite president of all time. And he was such an intense character and, great story. He used
to wrestle. He used to wrestle like guys off his cabinet.
The guy did jujitsu because he got his eye knocked out of his socket because he kept sparring in the White House. And they said, "Look, you're not going to be able to see anymore if you keep getting punched in the face." So then he took up jujitsu. So this guy was our first ninja president. It's incredible. And what I really like about Teddy is even though he wasn't in certain worlds, he worked through getting respect from all the worlds that he became a part of. So like when he first went out and tried to be a cowboy, these guys are like, check this guy out.
Yeah. Who's this? Who is this cowboy?
Yeah. So I think that was, really impressive. And there's a whole lot more about why I like Teddy.
Just one thing on Teddy, because like I don't know if you noticed, like I know every single U.S. president. Like I can name your presidents back to back from Washington all the way to Trump. I've deeply studied your U.S. presidents. But one thing I'd say about Roosevelt, there is a part of him I loved, but then the other sort of downside to him was he still was a big imperialist.
Yeah.
That was the one sort of, and it's the thing I always say about all the presidents is like they all had their good aspects and their not so good aspects. So,
see, me being a red-blooded American, I always get, he was very, very strong overseas in his opinions and his ideas and stuff like that. but he wanted America to be on the world stage. And he felt that that was his leadership, and that the country itself was the country that should be up front and center. Now, obviously,
by the way, the only real red blood Americans, you killed them all.
Yeah.
Let's just not forget. Let's just not forget.
Let's not go there. But
really, it was the Spaniards. We'll blame it on them.
Yeah. They got everybody sick.
We've just lost all our Spaniard listeners.
Yeah. Here's a blanket. But anyway,
FDR.
everybody has terrible stuff in their history, right?
Absolutely,
and so even Teddy, has his own detractors and things about that. But I like that he fought for the little guy at home, and he wanted America to be strong overseas. I appreciated that a lot. And then his cousin, Franklin, again, never letting a disability be something that detracts you or keeps you from reaching the highest office that our country can provide. And the fact that he did so much for so many people, and he was willing to take risks. He's like, let's try it. Let's try this. Let's try this. Let's do this. Let's do this. And some of the stuff worked, some of the stuff didn't work. But as opposed to being a guy who's sitting back with his hands on his hands underneath his butt and not doing anything and just hoping that people will volunteer their service and be rugged individuals like
a certain Herbert Hoover who was there before him. Well, the Depression. What do you want me to do?
Right. It's like, let's go try some stuff. Let's throw some stuff on the wall, see what sticks. Let's do this. Communicate with the American people. Give them a feeling of confidence that they can believe in themselves.
Have you seen Ken Burns' documentary on the Roosevelts? It's excellent.
Yeah, I've listened to a little bit of it. There's the one funny part with Teddy Roosevelt where there's this big mob guy in Tammany Hall, not Boss Tweed, but another one. I think he was called like the McGovern or something like that. I forget the guy. And Teddy Roosevelt walked up to him and said, if you keep messing with me, I'm going to punch you in the face. I'm going to kick you in the balls. See, I'm going to bite you. This is the things that Teddy Roosevelt said to this guy. And today people are like, I can't believe Trump said that. And it's like, dude, this guy was president talking about biting people and kicking people in the balls. So like, it's just the coverage is a little different. Teddy was saying that all the way back.
But like he was such a defender for the little guy, like that all the bigwigs in business and politics were like, listen, just make him vice president because we know that vice president, that's the end of your career. And then, but what, like someone said, yeah, but he's only one heartbeat away. Just if something happens to McKinley, and then when McKinley got assassinated, they're like, oh, shit.
Oh, about that, right?
Oh, about that. Like, whoops-a-daisy.
It's the greatest thing ever. It's so great. But yeah, he died young too because he was just burning both candles at
Man, he used to drink ridiculous amounts of caffeine. He was off his adrenals were fucked. Like,
yeah.
Adrenals were gone. You know what I mean?
No alcohol. Just he was on caffeine all the time. Never slept.
Yeah.
Man after my own heart. So, but so those guys, obvious reasons, and then Usain Bolt being the track guy. When I heard about how fast he was or how fast he ran the 100-meter dash in Beijing. I didn't know how he did it though. I was just like, oh my God, this guy broke the world record. Okay. And then I had it spoiled for me. And then it came on the broadcast later on that night. And I just sat with my jaw down to my ankles. I couldn't believe it. I was like, that guy jogged the last 20 meters and set the world record. Like, what does this mean? It's like finding out the Matrix was real for the first time ever. And just how much excitement that there was around him as an athlete. We had lost that since like Carl Lewis and Ben Johnson back in the day. They were kind of that electric in terms of their competition. We had nobody that had brought the sport to the attention level that Usain Bolt had brought.
He was a gift to track and field. You know what I mean? In terms of the publicity he brought. Did you ever see those YouTube clips? They're funny bits. Like it's an actor like acting as Usain, but like it's like he sprints and then like he stops halfway through and he's like yeah, and there's confetti going and the women are coming. The race isn't over yet. Like it's trying to sound like he wins by such a margin. He's just there slowing down. He's like yeah.
Well, it's incredible because like the Wachowski brothers that did the Matrix, they did a thing called the Animatrix, and one of the little vignettes in the Animatrix was a 100-meter sprinter. And the whole thing was he was able to physically push himself out of the Matrix through his performance. It wasn't like he became enlightened or whatever. Yeah. And in the story, it's like the guy pulls his quadricep muscle, falls down onto the ground, rolls and gets back up. And this is all, of course, happening in the middle, like a 15-minute cartoon, so it's all slowed down, the whole process. And he gets back up and he runs an 8.99, you know, and I'm just like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And then Usain Bolt like actually like kind of does it. And I'm like, are we living in the Matrix? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love his positive outlook. It's a master class in terms of positive, mindset before a track meet, and not letting the whole like angry face, tongue out, swagger kind of nonsense that I just think like, you guys aren't tough. You know, you go out into the north side of St. Louis, half of you guys will get beat up in a minute. You know, so like, let's not act that way. And just, you know, Usain being just fun and positive, and, you know, obviously being the fastest man in the world is really cool as well. It also, what a lot of people don't talk about either, is it changed the idea of body types that can be sprinters. Yeah. Every time you had a tall guy that was fast, it's like, well, let's make him a 400-meter runner. And if he was white, let's make him an 800-meter runner. You know, and it's like, well, no, let's see what they can do. Let's see what they're best at. And he had to beg his coach to let him run the 100. Which is funny because the guy we have in America right now, that Matt Bowling guy, I don't know if you've heard about him, the kid from Texas that ran 9.998.
I didn't hear about him, yeah.
Yeah, in the 100. He had to beg his coach too. They're like, oh, you're a 400-meter guy. And now he's got 5 of the top 1,500-meter times ever in high school history. And it's like, it doesn't matter who you are or what you are. Let's figure it out. And then let's go down that path and see how good you can be. You know, and that's what's crazy. So that's what I like about Usain Bolt. And Abraham Lincoln, freeing the slaves, being a person who did not win a bunch of times and then ended up winning, a man who sacrificed his life to a cause that was greater than him and then more important to him. The fact that our country's entirely together and he had to kind of break the constitutional law to make that happen. You know, his gift was how strong he was as a writer. Like that's what was so powerful about Abraham Lincoln. That was his sword, you know, was his writing. And I just, you know, admired that so much from Abraham Lincoln. Plus he was a good vampire slayer, if you've seen that movie.
Did you ever read the book Team of Rivals?
I have not read that book. But I like the concept of having people that don't all agree with each other or don't agree with you. As a coach, I tell people all the time, if they're my assistant coach, I said, if there's a problem, I want to know about it the day of. I want you to tell me about it. If you have an issue with something, I want to know about it right away. And I said, I may not like hearing about it. I said, it may piss me off, but then, you know, within 24 hours, I'm going to consume it mentally and figure out a way to address it or to be better or to explain why we're doing what we're doing. But I want you to tell me right away. I want to know if something's up.
I'll tell you just a quick little story about that. I really respect individuals who surround themselves with people who they know will disagree with them an awful lot. Like apparently Kennedy had the same. Like Kennedy had a lot of Republicans in his cabinet, and people from the Democratic Party were like, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I don't want to be around yes men." But when I was at Altus, one of the interns was a guy called Mike Wu, and like Mike would disagree a lot with people. Like Mike's great. Mike has. It's just like he probably won't like me saying this, but he always reminds me of Mr. Spock from Star Trek. Like, doesn't look like him. Just like he's really rationally minded. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't let emotion cloud his judgment. And I remember like one day someone said to me, they were like, "You must like not like Mike Wu, do you?" And I was like, "Why do you say that?" And he goes, "Because every time I hear you guys talking, he's always disagreeing with you and everyone else." And like I was like, I love Mike Wu. Right. I love that about Mike Wu. Like if I was made president or CEO or was put in charge of a large organization, like he would be one of my first phone calls. Because like I need you. Like I need you to like be like call me out on like bullshit. Because we're always clouded by our own subjective fucking perceptions. You know what I mean? Where like, you know, you say something and then someone needs to go, "Are you serious? That's a terrible idea." And then you go, "Jesus, yeah, that was a bad idea. Thank God you were there to catch that."
Well, and that's the thing. How do we have growth if there's no one to hold your feet to the
fire?
Yeah,
you want to be challenged. Yeah, stimulated.
Yeah, there's a guy we had at my school, Adam Bergeron, and I'm sure he would never listen to this anyway, but you know, he was somebody that would make a lot of people grumpy just because he would challenge them all the time. And I'm like, first of all, I want to be challenged. Second of all, I know if he's telling it to my face right now, he's never going to stab me in the back because he's already told me.
That's a big thing.
Huge.
That's a big thing.
Yeah. And I want you to tell it to my face and have my back in the crowd. I don't
Like
want you to go
there's a
against.
part of you that actually like loves that about the person. Then you know what I mean? Oh
Yeah,
man, you have the balls to say bullshit right to my face. I love it.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
It doesn't always mean we're going to have good conversations. And there were many conversations where I was like, all right, Adam, I can't today. I haven't sat down and researched for 7 hours about this political thing you're bringing to me or this style of teaching, or whatever. But I said, I appreciate it. And that's the thing. Like for me, it's trust. If I trust you because you're going to be honest with me and tell me what's up and tell me when I screw up, then I'm also going to be loyal to you. So the trust is the gasoline and loyalty machine, and that for me is enormous. And that's why, that idea of team of rivals is great. I've got assistant coaches that will tell me stuff all the time that I don't want to hear. And I'm like, but I need to hear it. And I want to hear it right away. I don't want to wait and worry and dwell because it allows me to then process it.
But man, that's a true friendship and a true relationship, and that's true trust as well. Like I always make this joke too. It's like, like it's like you're in the weight room with your mate, and he's trying to like do his max bench press, and the bar goes down, and he's there, and he's pushing it up, and he no ways you getting this, and you like you basically help the bar up and in, and he's like, did I get it? And you're like, no. But then you say to him, he says, I'm a true friend. That's why I wouldn't lie to you. You didn't get it. Sorry. Right. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So true friends tell the real truth. Like,
yeah, better luck next time,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Martin Luther King.
Yeah, Martin Luther King, in the situation that we've had, actually in our community in St. Louis and everything, and, we had protests and violence and burning of buildings and everything. And I look at how do you get something done, right? And so people go, oh, well, sure, for the racial equity stuff that he accomplished. Yeah, absolutely. That's the most critical thing. He's one of the most important people in American history. And I think if he wasn't assassinated when he was 39 years old, I think he would have been our first black president.
Man, I just want to say sorry to interrupt you. What a fucked up year 1968 was. You know what I mean? With Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and then LBJ's like, I'm not going to bother running. And then, and then the Democratic convention of that year, and then Nixon, like, standing up for the unspoken majority. What a weird year, man.
It was weird.
And the 60s in general were just mad.
Well, that's when people ask me, they say, well, what do you think was the worst decade in American history? And I don't say the Depression, because I don't feel like there were people still grinding. There were still people that were giving everything they had, and it showed resiliency, and we had Franklin Delano Roosevelt pretty soon thereafter, so I don't look at the 1930s as being our worst decade. And people go, that's nuts. And I said, no, because it was about the American spirit was still willing to fight. But it was the 1970s where America was like, what is this place?
Yeah, well, that was the aftermath of it.
Yeah, the aftermath, all the drugs and HIV and disco, like that just in and of itself puts it up there as one of the worst decades ever, And
John Travolta would he'd be very offended.
Yeah, whatever. He can go fly away with the aliens that he believes in.
Saturday Night Fever, what a movie.
Yeah,
well, they say like Carter would never become president if it hadn't been for what went on between Watergate and Vietnam and whatnot.
Oh, for sure. Would have never happened. Well, I mean, Nixon won by a landslide in his second election. And what's crazy about that is if he wasn't so paranoid and had his guys commit a criminal act, he might have his whole narrative might be different about what type of president he was. That's the craziest thing of all. Yeah. But he got caught and he did illegal stuff, and he's the worst president of all time.
Yeah. And you know what? He actually wasn't a bad politician. Like in terms of he'd made relationships with China at the time, and it's just that he was a lunatic. But again, remember you asked me that coach earlier on, it's a scarcity mindset. Richard Nixon was the way he was for a reason. Like you go back and look at his upbringing, as a Quaker, and just there's so many things. Again, like everyone is the way they are for a reason. Everyone and everything is the way they are for a reason. There's always a reason. It's just being able to step back and ask why, and being willing to investigate and try to understand. Correct. Listen, man, we're going way off script here with this last.
Yeah, we are.
I'd say like the guys who produced this at OPEX were like, whoa, these guys like really went off here because. Because I'd say what happened to us, they're like, hold on, about 20 minutes ago, he was like wrapping this up, and it's like, where is this 20 minutes going or whatever. So it was good, though. It was a good conversation, a good fun.
Awesome, man.
Listen, I got to wrap this up. Ryan, where can people find out more from you?
So you guys can follow me on Twitter at SprintersCompend, or at Instagram at Ryan.Banta, Banta. You can also look my book up on Amazon.com, which is the Sprinters Compendium. And if you want the print version, you're going to have to go to the US version of the Amazon site. If not, you'll just have access to the Kindle if you're an international person outside the United States. And then I also have my website, www.sprinters.com as well. So follow me in any one of those places. I try to post a lot. I've got a YouTube page as well, which is Bantasmo.1978, where I rebroadcast a lot of my Facebook Live videos, which I do for my friends first, and then I rebroadcast the ones I think are good for public consumption later. But yeah, I'm out there doing a lot of stuff, trying to commit to every couple of days, kind of saying something to the people about either life or coaching or training.
And all of that information will be linked up into the show notes. So for everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with myself and Ryan Banta. But for now, peace.
Peace out.